I never imagined that losing everything would lead me to the strangest marriage anyone could dream of. A year earlier, I had been the youngest daughter of one of the most respected families in the city. My father owned a successful company, my mother filled our home with warmth, and I lived a comfortable life surrounded by music lessons, expensive dresses, and plans for a future that seemed guaranteed. Then everything collapsed. My father's business failed almost overnight after being betrayed by people he trusted. He disappeared without leaving a single explanation, and no one could tell us whether he had escaped, been kidnapped, or simply chosen never to return. My mother couldn't survive the heartbreak. She passed away only weeks later, leaving my older sister Emily and me to face debts we had never known existed. The bank seized our family mansion, relatives suddenly forgot our phone numbers, and people who had once smiled politely began treating us like we carried a contagious disease. The same young men who used to flatter me now offered protection in exchange for favors that made my stomach turn. One afternoon, while movers carried the last pieces of furniture out of our childhood home, a group of former classmates drove past just to laugh at me. One of them rolled down her window and asked whether my fairy tale carriage had finally turned back into a pumpkin. I smiled despite the humiliation and answered that maybe it had, but unfortunately her face still looked like it had been carved from one. It was satisfying for exactly 5 seconds. Sharp words didn't pay rent, and they certainly couldn't save my sister from the disaster her own marriage had become. Emily had married Daniel Brooks before our family went bankrupt. Everyone believed she had chosen stability, but as soon as our money disappeared, Daniel's family treated her like an unwanted burden. His mother openly insulted her, while Daniel conveniently fell in love with another woman named Vanessa, who soon announced she was pregnant. Emily tried to pretend everything was under control whenever we spoke, and I pretended I wasn't counting every dollar left in my account. Neither of us fooled the other. Just when I thought life couldn't become any more humiliating, I received an invitation from a woman named Eleanor Ashford. Everyone knew the Ashford family. They were wealthier than politicians, more influential than celebrities, and almost untouchable in business circles. I couldn't understand why Mrs. Ashford wanted to meet someone like me. She invited me to a luxury hotel where even a single cup of tea probably cost more than my weekly groceries. I wore the last elegant dress I still owned, determined to keep whatever pride I had left. Eleanor welcomed me with a gentle smile that immediately made me suspicious. People that rich were rarely kind without expecting something in return. She didn't mention my family's downfall or offer empty sympathy. Instead, she calmly placed a folder in front of me and explained that her only son, Adrian Ashford, had been unconscious for 6 months after a terrible accident. I stared at her, waiting for the part that involved me. She continued by explaining that while Adrian lay in a coma, several members of their extended family had already begun fighting over his inheritance and position inside the company. She needed someone legally connected to him, someone loyal enough not to betray him while he couldn't defend himself. Then she looked directly into my eyes and asked if I would marry her son. I honestly thought she was joking. I asked her how an unconscious man needed a wife more than another bodyguard. She answered that bodyguards couldn't make legal decisions for him, but a wife could. She admitted that she had investigated my background and believed I was the only person desperate enough to accept such an unusual proposal without secretly planning to steal everything the family owned. I laughed bitterly and told her she had obviously noticed that I was bankrupt. Eleanor simply nodded and replied that bankruptcy didn't automatically destroy someone's character. Then she made an offer that left me speechless. If I agreed to become Adrian's wife, she would buy back my childhood home before it was sold to strangers, guarantee Emily's protection if her marriage collapsed, and make sure I would never again worry about money. I should have felt insulted by the idea of becoming the legal wife of a man who couldn't even open his eyes. Instead, I surprised myself by asking practical questions. Would I have a place to live? Yes. Would my sister be safe? Yes. Would Adrian object? Eleanor lowered her gaze and quietly admitted that he couldn't answer. Compared to every charming liar I had met recently, an unconscious billionaire suddenly didn't sound like the worst husband in the world. So I accepted. Our wedding was unlike anything I had imagined as a little girl. There were no cheerful guests or romantic vows. Adrian lay peacefully in a private medical suite inside the Ashford estate while a wedding ring was gently placed on his finger. I stood beside his bed wearing a beautiful white dress Eleanor had chosen for me. Looking at the handsome stranger who had unknowingly become my husband, I introduced myself in a whisper. "Hello, Adrian. My name is Claire. It seems we're married now. I hope you're easy to live with because my life has been falling apart lately." Naturally, he didn't answer. Oddly enough, that silence comforted me. During my first week in the mansion, I expected everyone to treat me like a paid actress hired to play the role of Mrs. Ashford. Instead, Eleanor welcomed me as though I truly belonged there. She gave me a spacious suite near Adrian's room, filled my closet with clothes, handed me the keys to a luxury car, and then casually placed a black credit card in my hand. I stared at it as if it were made of gold. I asked whether she was certain she trusted me with something so valuable. She smiled and told me that no daughter-in-law of hers would ever feel ashamed because she couldn't afford lunch or new shoes. I almost cried. My husband hadn't spoken a single word to me, yet my mother-in-law had already treated me with more kindness than most of my own relatives. At first, I visited Adrian because it seemed like part of my responsibility. Later, Eleanor encouraged me to keep talking to him because doctors believed familiar voices could sometimes help unconscious patients. Eventually those visits became the favorite part of my day. Adrian never interrupted me, never judged me, and never argued. Sitting beside his bed felt strangely peaceful. Every evening I told him everything that had happened. I complained about rude relatives, confessed every unnecessary purchase I made with his mother's credit card, described awkward conversations, and even admitted embarrassing memories I had never shared with anyone else. Sometimes I teased him for looking unfairly handsome while contributing absolutely nothing to our conversations. Other nights I admitted how much I missed my mother or how terrified I was that my family would never truly recover. Adrian became my silent diary, my invisible best friend, and somehow the safest listener I had ever known, even though he never opened his eyes once. Over the following weeks, my strange routine slowly became my new normal. Every morning I greeted Adrian before breakfast, every afternoon I sat beside him while nurses completed his therapy, and every evening I treated him like the only person in the world patient enough to listen to my endless stories. I even started giving him sarcastic commentary about his own relatives. There was one family member in particular who irritated me beyond words. His cousin Victor visited often, but never because he cared about Adrian. He walked through the mansion like a man inspecting property that already belonged to him. He dressed perfectly, smiled too often, and spoke to the staff as though they were invisible. The first time he cornered me in the hallway, he slowly looked me over and asked whether I was enjoying my unexpected promotion from bankrupt nobody to billionaire's wife. I smiled politely and answered that central heating alone made the marriage worthwhile. His expression darkened. Then he reminded me that Adrian might never wake up, implying that my comfortable life would disappear the moment Eleanor grew tired of supporting me. Before I could answer, Eleanor appeared behind him with the calm confidence only truly powerful people possess. She didn't raise her voice. She simply informed Victor that as long as she was alive, no one in the Ashford family would disrespect her daughter-in-law. Watching him force an awkward smile before walking away was one of the most satisfying moments I'd experienced in months. Naturally, that evening I reported everything to Adrian. I informed him that his cousin had the personality of a mosquito that somehow learned how to wear expensive suits. I jokingly asked him to blink if he disagreed. He remained perfectly still, so I declared victory in the argument. Just as I leaned back in my chair, I noticed one of his fingers twitch. At first I thought my imagination was playing tricks on me. Then it happened again. I screamed so loudly that nurses came running. Eleanor arrived seconds later, followed by Dr. Collins, Adrian's neurologist. He carefully examined every response before smiling for the first time since I had met him. He explained that even small movements could indicate improving neurological activity. Eleanor burst into tears, clutching my hands while thanking me over and over for staying beside her son. I felt guilty accepting her gratitude because all I had really done was complain about life to a man who couldn't answer. Still, after everyone left, I sat beside Adrian once more and whispered that if he had actually heard me comparing his cousin to an insect, I hoped he appreciated my honesty. His monitor beeped slightly faster, and I immediately pointed a finger at him. "Don't even think about encouraging me," I muttered. Life inside the Ashford estate settled into a comfortable rhythm. The nurses gradually taught me how to help care for Adrian properly. At first I was terrified of doing something wrong. I worried about adjusting his blankets incorrectly or accidentally disturbing medical equipment. One afternoon I applied far too much lip balm because the air in his room was dry. Looking at the shiny result, I couldn't stop laughing. I apologized and told him he looked ready to advertise expensive cosmetics instead of recovering from a coma. Once again the monitor reacted, forcing me to wonder whether somewhere deep inside he could actually hear every ridiculous word leaving my mouth. Outside the safety of the mansion, however, life remained much less peaceful. Eleanor insisted I accompany her to charity events as Mrs. Ashford. Society greeted me with fake smiles hiding genuine curiosity. Everyone knew exactly who I was, the daughter of a ruined family who had mysteriously become the wife of one of the country's wealthiest heirs. Some pitied me, calling me a living widow. Others quietly suggested I had married for money. During one luncheon, a woman wearing enough diamonds to blind an airport runway remarked that Eleanor had been incredibly generous to rescue someone like me. I smiled sweetly before answering that I had indeed fallen from wealth, but fortunately I had landed somewhere with better parking. The smile disappeared from her face immediately. Another guest whispered loudly enough for me to hear that marrying a man who couldn't even speak sounded unbearably lonely. I calmly replied that after meeting too many men who talked constantly without saying anything worthwhile, silence had become surprisingly refreshing. Even Eleanor struggled to hide her amusement. Victor, unfortunately, never missed an opportunity to provoke me. During another family gathering he raised a glass and joked that Adrian had become much quieter than ever before. A few relatives laughed nervously. I placed my own glass on the table and reminded Victor that while Adrian had built much of the company they all depended on, Victor had spent years simply benefiting from someone else's success. The room fell completely silent. Victor looked ready to explode, but Eleanor merely sipped her tea as though nothing unusual had happened. Later that evening I proudly informed Adrian that I had defended his reputation yet again and suggested that if he ever woke up, he owed me flowers, very expensive flowers, not the disappointing supermarket bouquets people bought at the last minute. To my amazement, one of his fingers moved again. This time I didn't scream. Instead, I leaned closer and quietly begged him to keep fighting because I was growing tired of arguing with his relatives alone. The monitor responded with another series of faster beeps, and for reasons I couldn't explain, hope slowly began replacing fear. A few days later my sister Emily came to visit. The moment I saw her, I knew something was terribly wrong. She looked thinner, exhausted, and wore much heavier makeup than usual. She hugged me tightly before asking whether I was truly happy living in such an unusual marriage. I laughed and admitted that my husband still hadn't argued with me once, my mother-in-law kept feeding me homemade desserts, and somehow I had become the most financially stable member of our family. Emily smiled, but her eyes remained full of sadness. Eleanor soon joined us for tea and immediately treated my sister with the same kindness she had shown me from the beginning. During the conversation, Eleanor casually mentioned that I had told her Daniel wasn't worthy of Emily. My sister looked at me in surprise before finally breaking down. Between tears she confessed everything. Daniel had secretly transferred money into hidden accounts, bought an apartment for Vanessa, and allowed his own mother to pressure Emily into accepting his mistress and future child as though none of it were humiliating. Eleanor listened without interrupting. When Emily finished speaking, my mother-in-law calmly picked up her phone and called the Ashford family's attorney, Olivia Bennett. Less than an hour later, Olivia arrived carrying several folders. She reviewed every document Emily had managed to collect and assured us that Daniel had made far more legal mistakes than he realized. For the first time in months, my sister cried because she finally believed someone powerful was standing beside her. That night, after Emily returned home, I sat beside Adrian once again. I told him that his mother might actually be the strongest woman I had ever met. Then I warned him that if he eventually recovered only to disappoint such an incredible mother, I would personally make him regret it. Naturally, he remained silent, but somehow I no longer felt alone while speaking into that quiet room. It had become the one place where I could laugh, cry, complain, and hope without pretending to be stronger than I really was. 3 days later, everything changed for Emily. Olivia organized a meeting with Daniel and his family, and Eleanor insisted that both of us attend. We arrived at Daniel's house without warning. His mother looked offended the moment she opened the door, while Vanessa sat comfortably in the living room as though she already owned the place. Daniel's confidence lasted less than a minute. Olivia calmly placed one document after another across the table, proving he had secretly transferred marital assets, purchased property for his mistress, and hidden large sums of money during the marriage. His face slowly lost all color. Vanessa looked back and forth between the papers and Daniel as if she had only just realized the fairy tale she had been promised wasn't legally protected. Emily stood in silence until Daniel tried to step toward her with another pathetic apology. Before he could touch her, I moved between them and told him he had lost the right to pretend he cared the moment he chose another woman. Eleanor delivered the final blow by reminding Daniel's mother that respectable families didn't encourage their sons to build second households while their wives were still living under the same roof. Nobody had a clever response. Emily filed for divorce that very week, and thanks to Olivia's work, Daniel lost much of what he had tried so desperately to hide. My sister temporarily moved into the Ashford estate, where Eleanor welcomed her as warmly as she had welcomed me. Every morning Emily apologized for causing inconvenience until Eleanor finally threatened to forbid both of us from apologizing ever again unless we wanted to spend entire afternoons shopping with unlimited credit cards. I jokingly asked whether that was truly a punishment. Eleanor gave me a look that made me wisely end the conversation. Meanwhile, I continued spending every evening beside Adrian. I updated him on everything happening around us, telling him that his mother had unofficially adopted both my sister and me, that Olivia frightened dishonest men more effectively than the police, and that his cousin Victor still behaved like an ambitious mosquito searching for opportunities to bite people. One quiet evening, while I was teasing Adrian about refusing to contribute anything except his impossibly handsome face, I suddenly noticed his eyelids tremble. This time it wasn't a finger. It was unmistakable. I leaned forward, holding my breath, waiting for him to open his eyes. Instead, the movement stopped as suddenly as it had begun. My heart raced as I ran to find Eleanor and Dr. Collins. After another examination, the doctor confirmed Adrian's brain activity continued improving. He believed consciousness might return much sooner than anyone had expected. That night I stayed beside Adrian until sunrise. For once, I didn't joke very much. Instead, I quietly admitted that I hoped he would be kind if he ever woke up because I had confessed far too many embarrassing things during the previous months. I reminded him that I had complained about shopping, cried over my parents, insulted nearly half his relatives, and occasionally criticized how unfairly attractive he looked. I warned him that judging me afterward would be completely unacceptable. His fingers lightly brushed mine. Tears instantly filled my eyes, but I wiped them away before anyone could see. I had developed a reputation for surviving difficult situations with sarcasm, and I intended to protect it. Unfortunately, life wasn't finished testing me. Shortly afterward, I attended another charity event representing the Ashford family. As I spoke with guests, someone called my name. I turned and froze. Standing across the room was Nathan Carter, a man I had almost fallen in love with before my family's collapse. Back then everyone assumed we would eventually become a couple. When my father lost everything, Nathan quietly disappeared from my life without a single explanation. Now that I was Mrs. Ashford, he suddenly remembered I existed. He apologized for abandoning me during the hardest period of my life and claimed he wanted to help me now. I asked what exactly he planned to help with. Looking genuinely emotional, he suggested I didn't have to remain married to a man trapped in a coma forever. He insisted I deserved real love instead of a marriage built on obligation. Once, hearing those words might have broken my heart. Instead, I simply felt disappointed by how late they had arrived. I calmly reminded him that when I had needed support most, he had chosen silence. Now I was married, and regardless of Adrian's condition, I intended to respect that promise. Nathan tried arguing that Adrian couldn't even hear us. Before he finished speaking, I warned him not to complete that sentence unless he wanted to discover how painful a designer handbag could become when swung with determination. At that exact moment I noticed Victor standing nearby, clearly enjoying the entire scene. Raising my voice just enough for him to hear, I firmly introduced myself as Mrs. Ashford and suggested Nathan take his fantasies somewhere else. Eleanor appeared moments later, gracefully asking whether there was a problem. I answered that everything had already been resolved. Nathan quietly left, and Victor suddenly looked much less entertained. That evening I sat beside Adrian once again, telling him every detail. I jokingly rated Nathan's rescue attempt 3 points out of 10, complimenting his hairstyle while criticizing his timing. The monitor remained steady until I mentioned proudly informing everyone that I was Mrs. Ashford. A single louder beat echoed through the room. I narrowed my eyes suspiciously. "Don't tell me you liked hearing that," I whispered. "You're becoming surprisingly possessive for someone who's been asleep for months." His fingers moved again beneath mine. My smile slowly faded into something more sincere. I squeezed his hand gently and admitted that I truly hoped he would wake up soon because I was exhausted from fighting his family's battles alone. A deep, rough voice suddenly answered from the bed. "Then tell me which battle I should start with." For several seconds I couldn't even breathe. My chair tipped backward as I practically fell onto the floor staring at the man whose eyes were finally open. Adrian looked pale and weak, but unmistakably awake. He watched my horrified expression with exhausted amusement before speaking again. "I've been listening for a very long time, Claire. Every embarrassing confession, every shopping story, every insult directed at Victor, every complaint about his perfect face flashed through my mind all at once. My soul practically packed its bags and left my body. I struggled back into the chair, desperately trying to regain some dignity. You couldn't have heard everything," I whispered. Adrian's lips curved into the faintest smile. "I heard enough to know you called me decorative furniture, unfairly handsome, and the safest man you've ever complained to." I covered my face with both hands and groaned. "Please," I muttered, "go back to sleep." Instead, he laughed quietly for the first time, and somehow that sound was even more dangerous than the silence I had grown used to. The following weeks felt completely unreal. Adrian was awake, but Dr. Collins refused to let him rush his recovery. He needed therapy, rest, and patience, 3 things he accepted far more gracefully than I expected. Unfortunately for me, he also remembered absolutely everything I had ever told him. The moment we were finally left alone, he looked at me with obvious amusement and thanked me for providing 6 months of uninterrupted entertainment. I insisted he had imagined most of those conversations. He calmly repeated several of my most embarrassing confessions word for word, including the time I admitted returning an expensive handbag because I felt guilty using Eleanor's credit card. My face burned with embarrassment while he smiled like a man who had just discovered the greatest secret in the world. Recovering Adrian turned out to be much more difficult than unconscious Adrian. A sleeping husband couldn't tease me. A conscious one certainly could. Whenever I brought him meals, he thanked me by reminding me that I once described him as the world's most attractive piece of furniture. When I adjusted his pillows, he jokingly asked whether I planned to throw another romance novel at him if he behaved like the arrogant billionaire heroes I used to criticize while reading beside his bed. Every sarcastic remark I had made during his coma came back to haunt me. Eleanor loved every second of it. She laughed more often than I had ever seen, claiming my endless conversations had given her son something worth returning to. I protested that I wasn't therapy. Adrian immediately replied that I was much louder than therapy. I threatened to stop visiting his room altogether. He answered that he doubted I could stay away for more than a day. To my frustration, he was probably right. Despite all the teasing, I couldn't ignore the kindness behind his words. Adrian thanked every nurse personally, showed endless patience during rehabilitation, and treated my sister as though she had always belonged in the family. When Emily visited after his recovery, she awkwardly thanked him for everything Eleanor had done to protect her during the divorce. Adrian simply answered that anyone important to me was already family to him. Emily burst into tears so quickly that I immediately scolded Adrian for using emotionally responsible sentences without warning people first. Even Eleanor couldn't stop smiling. As Adrian slowly regained his strength, the rest of the Ashford family realized their opportunity had disappeared. Victor reacted first. Hoping Adrian was still too weak to interfere, he organized a family meeting to discuss temporary leadership of the company. Eleanor attended, and naturally I went with her. Adrian had been ordered to stay upstairs. At least that was the plan. Victor confidently explained that the family needed someone capable of making immediate business decisions until Adrian fully recovered. I quietly translated his speech for everyone by observing that what he really meant was that he wanted Adrian's chair before Adrian could stand up again. Victor glared at me, insisting I knew nothing about business. Before I could answer, a familiar voice echoed across the room. Adrian had arrived, leaning on a cane but standing proudly on his own feet. Every conversation stopped instantly. I rushed toward him, demanding to know why he had ignored his doctor's instructions. He smiled and reminded me that I had once encouraged him to wake up quickly because I was tired of fighting mosquitoes alone. Then he turned toward the rest of the family. Calmly and without raising his voice, Adrian announced that while he had been unable to speak, he had still been aware of far more than anyone imagined. Eleanor had documented every questionable decision Victor made during those months, and Olivia possessed enough evidence to begin formal legal action if necessary. Olivia entered carrying another thick folder, looking as confident as ever. Victor attempted to laugh the accusations away, but no one joined him. Within a single afternoon he lost his management authority, his influence inside the company, and most of the respect he had been pretending to enjoy for years. Watching him leave without another word was strangely satisfying. Not long afterward, Daniel made the mistake of trying to pressure Emily into reconsidering their divorce after learning Adrian had recovered. This time Adrian personally joined the legal meeting through a video conference. He remained polite throughout the discussion, but every calm sentence he spoke seemed to drain the confidence from Daniel's face. Olivia finished what Adrian started. Emily secured a fair settlement, recovered property Daniel had hidden, and officially closed that painful chapter of her life forever. Vanessa quickly discovered that promises made by dishonest men became far less impressive after lawyers became involved. A few weeks later Nathan attempted one final appearance by sending flowers to the Ashford estate along with a note asking whether I might finally be free to meet him. Adrian happened to collect the mail that morning. He slowly read the note aloud while I nearly choked on my breakfast. When I demanded the letter back, he calmly reminded me it had been addressed to Mrs. Ashford, which technically meant it belonged to both of us. I accused him of becoming unbelievably annoying since waking up. He asked whether I preferred him unconscious. I answered far too honestly. No, you're much more difficult now, but somehow I don't mind. His teasing smile disappeared. Looking directly into my eyes, he quietly admitted that even before opening his eyes he had already begun looking forward to my visits every day. While everyone else treated him like a patient, I had spoken to him like an ordinary person. I had laughed, cried, complained, confessed fears, and trusted him with the parts of myself I tried to hide from the rest of the world. Hearing those words made every awkward moment worthwhile. Soon afterward, Eleanor fulfilled the promise that had changed my life. She handed me the keys to my childhood home after buying it back before developers could destroy it. Emily stood beside me crying as we walked through the neglected garden where we had played as children. For a moment I believed returning there would finally make me feel complete again. Instead, after looking back at Adrian waiting beside the car with Eleanor, I realized something unexpected. The house represented my past, but it was no longer my future. I thanked Eleanor with all my heart, then admitted that although I wanted to restore the old mansion, I no longer wanted to live there. Home wasn't a building anymore. Home was the family that had chosen me when I believed I had nothing left to offer. 3 months later, Adrian suggested holding a second wedding ceremony, not because we needed another legal marriage, but because this time both of us could actually say our vows. Standing together in the garden before the ceremony, he joked that since he was finally awake, I was free to ask all the important questions before marrying him again. I immediately asked whether Eleanor would continue feeding me homemade desserts. He laughed and promised she would. I asked whether I could continue talking endlessly every evening. He answered that he would be disappointed if I ever stopped. Finally, with complete sincerity, Adrian told me he loved me, not because I had stayed beside his hospital bed, not because I had defended his family, and not because I had accidentally entertained him through months of silence. He loved me because I had walked into the quietest chapter of his life and refused to let him face it alone. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. I accepted his hand and happily agreed to marry him again, this time by choice instead of desperation. Our second wedding was filled with laughter instead of uncertainty. Emily smiled brighter than she had in years. Eleanor cried throughout the ceremony without even pretending otherwise. Olivia actually looked emotional for the first time since I had met her, although she denied it later. Victor wasn't invited. Daniel had become nothing more than a painful memory. Nathan politely sent congratulations and finally understood that he had missed his chance long ago. As Adrian and I walked away together after the ceremony, I realized how strange fate could be. I had entered that family searching for safety, a roof over my head, and the chance to reclaim my childhood home. Instead, I found something I never expected, a man who had heard every foolish joke, every selfish fear, every embarrassing confession, and every sarcastic insult I had ever spoken, yet still looked at me as though I were the best thing that had ever happened to him. I married Adrian to survive, but I stayed because somewhere between silence and laughter, that impossible marriage became the place where I finally belonged.